Good afternoon and welcome to CEW+Inspire. My name is Doreen Moraski and I'm the Student Program Manager at CEW. I want to welcome those of you who are joining us both here in person and also others that are driving us via live streaming. We do appreciate the University of Michigan's Council for Disability Concerns for connecting with us and requesting the live stream option. As you can see, we will not have the closed caption available during the live streaming, but we are recording the session and we'll have it available on a YouTube video at CEW with the closed caption option. To get started with, how many of you are new to CEW? Yay, okay, wonderful, well, welcome. We hope that today is the first introduction to a more ongoing relationship in the future, and welcome back to those of you who have connected us in the past. Let me give you a really quick overview of what CEW provides. So CEW empowers women and underserved individuals in the University of Michigan and surrounding communities by serving as an advocate and providing resources to help them reach their academic, financial, and professional potential. We provide numerous services, including holistic career and educational counseling, programs and workshops aimed to support personal and professional development, funding resources, and too many other resources to mention here. So we invite you to get familiar with us by visiting our website. Today's program is part of a larger initiative, CEW+Inspire. CEW+Inspire is a comprehensive program that aims to expand the vision of what is possible and to teach lifelong learning skills to non-traditional students, empowering each to make bold and confident choices about their futures. There are three key components of this program. The first is honoring diverse scholarship of faculty members, recognizing their contribution while serving as an inspiration to students and offering real-life representations to authentic journeys to success. And we're so delighted that Dr. Kaufman is part of our partners in that program. The other part is to teach creative hands-on expression and learning centered on coping and resilience skills. And the last part is teaching guided meditation skills throughout the academic year. Based on research from multiple sources, mindfulness is considered a key skill that can be utilized to reduce stress and induce a state of relaxation. Some of the many benefits of practicing mindfulness are higher brain functioning, increased attention and focus, increased clarity in thinking and perception, lowered anxiety levels, and better sleep. Mindfulness is a skill that can be learned and most effective when practiced on a regular basis. As part of today's program, we will be introducing a very short guided mindfulness meditation practice that's intended to provide a glimpse into how to use this powerful skill as a way to help us all arrive, focus, and be present. So for a couple of things before we get started, we do appreciate, all of you will see that at your tables, that those of you that are here, there is a pre-survey on your table, and we appreciate if you could take a couple of minutes real quickly to fill out the pre-survey, and then we will be collecting those shortly. We understand that all of us live complex life, and for some of you who may not be able to stay with us through the full program till 2:30. Can I get a show of hands of any of you that need to leave before 2:30? Is there any of you that need to learn? Okay, possibly. If you do, that's fine. We hope you can stay as long as possible, but if you could plan to leave just a couple minutes earlier than you need to leave, and see Leah in the back, and she has a post-survey that she'll give you, and it should just take a couple of minutes to complete. That will be helpful for us for future programming to figure out if we are hitting the right mark in terms of providing some of the skill-based learning that we hope to provide through this program. The other thing is that we will have a short evaluation with that. Following today's program, for those of you who can stay beyond 2:30, there will be a reception with food and to continue the conversation and to interact more with Dr. Kaufman as well with others in the room. Okay, with that, what I'd like to say is I'd like to begin, so I'll give you just a moment maybe to complete your surveys first. And for those of you that are not in the room completing surveys, you might just start to take a moment just to try to settle into wherever you're seated. When you've completed the survey, if you can just put them towards the end of your table, we can collect those and appreciate that. Those of you in the room, you also see that there are name tags, and we appreciate if you could put them on, so that will make it easier for us to connect with you as well. So for many of us in the room, we often spend our days rushing from one place to the next to be able to arrive on time and to switch gears very quickly. And what I'm going to present you with is a very short mindful meditation exercise that's designed to help you arrive, settle, and be more fully present to the presentation you're about to experience with Dr. Kaufman. So let's begin by taking a moment to allow your body to settle wherever you are. Find a comfortable position, and if possible, one that allows your spine to be long but with a natural curve. For this practice, you may want to close your eyes if that's comfortable for you. If it's not comfortable, no worries. Simply allow your gaze to find a neutral spot in front of you. So let your belly and shoulders relax and invite a sense of ease. In a moment, I will ring a chime and invite you to focus on the sound. Just follow the sound, experience its vibration as it registers in your body. As the sound fades, I invite you to turn your attention inward and focus on the sound of your own breath. Today I will guide you through a practice on focused breathing. This will help calm your mind and relax your body. Start by taking a full breath in and a long breath out. And another full breath in and long breath out. Now allow the breath to find its natural rhythm. In and out. Without trying to change your breathing in any way, take this moment to notice how your body feels, how it breathes naturally as the air passes underneath your nostrils. Maybe the rise and fall of the breath as it enters your chest or your belly. Choose one area to observe the breath for the next few minutes. Whichever area you choose, direct your attention to noticing the inhale and the exhale. Whenever you find your mind has wandered, just come back to the breath. Notice the different aspects of your breath, the phases of the inhale and the exhale. Whether your breath is warm or cool, deep or shallow. Simply noticing one breath at a time. If possible, see if you notice the pause in between the inhale and the exhale. If your mind has wandered again, sometimes it's helpful to use counting with the breath. Simply counting, inhale 1, exhale 1. Inhale 2, exhale 2. This technique can be used anytime your mind has wandered, and you can come back to your breathing again and again without judgment. As we begin to close this practice, bring your attention back to your body. How does your body feel? If you're aware of tension in any part of your body, can you invite a sense of ease and relaxation there? Are there sounds around you? Simply notice them without judgment. What are the sensations of the clothes or air on your skin? Feeling where your body makes contact with the chair or with the earth beneath you. If it feels comfortable, you may experiment with wiggling your toes, your fingers, or any body part that feels comfortable to you. In a moment, I will end this practice with the sound of 3 chimes, and I invite you to continue listening with your eyes closed or your gaze averted until you hear the sound of the 3rd chime fade. At that point, refocus your attention back to the front of the room. just imagine how much our day would be if we just could pause for a couple minutes to catch our breath and to catch up with ourselves. So before I shift over, I'd like to just spend just a short time giving a very short introduction to Dr. Kaufman. But before I do, I want to invite, is there any questions about the mindful meditations? What I will say is they are a regular practice that we will be offering at CEW on Wednesdays. We call it our midweek mindfulness. That will just be intentionally a half hour, 12:15 to 12:45, to hopefully invite, and again, all members of the community are welcome to participate and join us there. So let me go ahead and switch gears now and give you what you all have come for, which is to hear Dr. Jacqueline Kaufman. So Jackie completed her undergraduate, Dr. Kaufman completed her undergraduate training at the University of Michigan and remained with the university as a research assistant at the Kresge Hearing Institute for several years before enrolling in graduate school at the University of Wisconsin in Milwaukee. She obtained her PhD in clinical psychology with a specialization in clinical neuropsychology and experimental neuroscience. So I'm going to turn the program over to Dr. Kaufman so she can tell us more about her wonderful path into the work that she's doing today. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Kaufman.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay? Okay. Well, hi, thank you for that lovely meditation, and that certainly helped me feel more relaxed. Thank you for the lovely introduction. I also want to thank CEW+. It's been so lovely going to hear the talks, was it 2 months ago? Yeah, and just learning more about what CEW does. I've sent so many people there since learning more about what's going on, because it's a different place now than it was when I was in school, and so now I'm taking advantage of it like I wish I would have then. So today I'll be talking about inclusion of individuals with disabilities in our communities, and thinking about ways that we can create access for everybody, all of our neighbors, including individuals who may be viewed as people who couldn't participate, but should be participating in every single aspect of our everyday life in our community. So as a couple quick disclosures and caveats, I really have no disclosures. I have no financial disclosures. I have a nonprofit special hockey program that I co-run with Kim Gerns, but that's nonprofit, so I guess there's no disclosure there. And I'm on the board of United Cerebral Palsy, and again, nothing financial. As far as some caveats, I do think, particularly in this time when we're being extra sensitive about thinking about our words and being careful, I'm going to ask everybody to actually be a little less careful today. So today we'll be having a lot of terminology and discussion from myself, hopefully from everyone here, that could be perceived by some as offensive. And I say this not because the intention is going to be to say something rude or offensive, but because we all come from different frames, and the words we use and the way we talk about things might be different. And it is very rare for this to be malevolent. I think most of the time it's just because we come from different frames. And I don't want our conversation to shut down and become negative just because someone used a term that may be ill-informed or may be different from the term you use in your community. So I just hope we can keep an open mind as we're talking about things. And I'll have some examples in my talk about terms that are thrown around about hearing loss and deafness, for example, that, depending on what circle you run, the very same term may be very offensive. This is going to be a participation workshop, so there really are very few right or wrong answers, and at various points I'll ask you to kind of turn and partner with people that you're with, and hopefully we can have rousing, lively conversation. The goals of the workshop are for us to come together and talk about the topic of disability in our community, and to really identify, even just something basic like a definition. And we won't walk away with one today. The punchline is we won't have one, but for us to just have the conversation about what is a definition of disability as we think about how we can influence our community. And then to think about very deliberately how we can influence our personal frames and environments and make sure that there's strong inclusion. So I'd like to tell you a little bit about myself first and give you kind of the path I took to get here. And I share this because I think it's important. I know that there's some students in the room and people who are still on their journey of getting to their career destinations, things like that. So I had a very windy path. I started out at U of M here, and I was a terrible student. I was on academic probation and nearly kicked out because I was not all that gifted in the academic realm. And I was a science major, and I was pre-med, and I was going to go into burn medicine, and I was really ready until I had to take physics and math and all of these hard science classes. And I loved science, and I really was bad at it. So it didn't work well. And I ended up finding a science that worked for me. Biology and neuroscience and neurophysiology, those were fun and great, and those worked. And so, out of the gate, it was kind of like a kick in the gut that the plan wasn't going to be the plan. And after I was doing some undergraduate research, I ended up taking a few years after school. Not time off, because it's not time off when you take time in between. I know we have a lot of parents and professors telling us you shouldn't take time off. It's not time off. You're taking time to dedicate yourself to learning something new. So that's what I did. I took 3 years and worked in a research lab doing otopathology research, and I loved it. I loved the bench work, working with chemicals and doing all kinds of fun stuff like that, and I really enjoyed it. And eventually, I ended up going back to school and got my PhD in psychology. I didn't get in the first time I applied to school, because remember the whole academic probation, grad schools don't care for that so much when they receive those transcripts. So it doesn't mean you can't. It may mean you need to do a little more legwork to build up your resume again and prove your worth. But I went into psychology and had a plan to do neuropsychology because I really liked this brain stuff. And then I stumbled into doing a pediatric medical psychology internship and found out that was really fun. I liked the medical stuff that I had originally thought I liked. And in graduate school, I had to take an out-of-department minor, and I had to do a foreign language, and I tried to game the system. And so I took a bunch of sign language classes and a mediation class, and it was like, well, we'll call it mediation in the deaf community. And they accepted that. But then when I was done, I left with this tremendous education about deaf culture, an introduction to sign. And so when I came out on the other end of all of this, and I took a fellowship that happened to be in a rehab department, I've never heard of rehab psychology. Who knew such a thing existed? Apparently a lot of other people, but not me. And I thought, these are my people. This is what this whole journey was for. And I've been able to pull little pieces from what I did, and it was as if it was the intended journey all along. Because even though it feels like you're stumbling backwards or getting blocked at the places that it feels like doors are getting shut, often they're opening in the space you're supposed to be. And you're supposed to think of how all those things pull together. So now my clinical work is with pediatric patients who have really complicated neurodevelopmental histories, and I look at their thinking skills, their cognitive function. And I'm really interested in working with kids who have hearing loss or who are deaf. And because I've learned sign and because I have more experience from this minor I made up, it turns out that's really something cool I get to do. And I have an understanding about the physiology of it from my undergraduate research. So you can reach back and start pulling and find the unique gifts that you have to really affect what you do later. My research is in adapted cognitive assessment. So I work with kids who have motor and speech impairments and can't participate in our traditional testing. Well, when I was doing MRI research with individuals with cocaine addiction in grad school for my dissertation, that doesn't sound like anything I do now, but in an MRI scanner, you can't talk and you can't move. It screws up the imaging. So now I have skills of how to test cognition in people who can't move and can't talk. Sounds like my kids. So again, it's totally unrelated on paper, but you can find the links when you work hard and you have a lot of gifts to give in these areas that you're entering. I also do a lot of advocacy, which I really enjoy. And I've been really enjoying taking the different skills from these different parts of this journey and applying them now in something I really love. And I hope that everyone continues to do that. I continue to change by the year, which probably drives my boss crazy, but it's fun to keep, checking things out. So what I want to do is first start in talking about the topic of our workshop. The first thing I want to do is define disability. Again, we're not going to do that very successfully, but I want us to talk about it. So people rarely like to be defined by a singular characteristic. I certainly don't like it. It would bother me if someone made a judgment about me because I was short. I can't do anything about that. That's just what's what. So I would hope that wouldn't be some defining characteristic. So, I think my question to you is, what is a disability? What are the different types of disabilities that we might see experienced by our neighbors in our community? So does anybody have a thought about what they would say is a disability, how they may define it? So differently abled, something out of the range of what we would say normal. I'll put my air quotes up. Yeah, again, this is why I had the caveat. If we're gonna talk honestly about it, we are invariably gonna slip into all the things that are uncomfortable to say because we don't necessarily feel that way, but we don't have great language to talk about this stuff. What kinds of disabilities do you see in your community? What are things that when you think of, oh, that falls in the category of disability, that's an issue, but that doesn't quite count?
Physical, cognitive, mental health. There's a wide range, but there's a lot of invisible disabilities that we don't oftentimes consider to fit into our definition of disability until the people that are in front of us help us define what that means for them.
I think that's a terrific point. There's these sort of clear indicators of when you look at someone of a physical or a developmental or a cognitive, some sort of movement or sensory disability, but there's invisible disabilities that people have that may not be apparent, that someone might experience day to day, but it isn't necessarily apparent to someone on the outside. Did you have a comment? Same comment. So definite point.
I've also heard it described as a mismatch between someone's abilities and the environment.
Great, so a mismatch between the abilities and the environment. And we're going to actually come to that because that's sort of that's the most universally accepted way of talking about it when we are talking about it in a scientific way. That's exactly right. Yeah, so this could fluctuate. Maybe a person can have a disability where there are influential factors in one moment, and then the next moment it's not an issue at all. So fluctuating and variable. So it's a bit in the eye of the beholder too. So one person with one condition and another person with the same exact condition may say, I don't have a disability, I don't know what you're talking about. The other person says this is a tremendous disability. So it really depends the realm. What I'm going to show you is what the World Health Organization says. All right, and this is, I encourage you to look into this more. We don't have the bandwidth today to get into the details, but this is the model, the International Classification of Disability and Health and Functioning. This is the model that really breaks it down well for us. And some of the definitions we have associated with the ICF model are listed on this page. We have things like body functions. These are sort of the physiological functions of our body. We have the structures, like the parts, like your arm and your heart and your head. You can have impairments as a definition. So these are problems in body functions. Activity is the execution of a task. So I'm picking up this phone. That's a task, I'm doing it. I'm going to the bathroom. That's an activity. An activity limitation is a difficulty doing an activity. These are kind of like mechanical definitions, but they're very helpful for us to have practical conversations. Participating is being involved in a life situation, going to the market, having a party, something like this. A participation restriction is something interfering with that and a limited access to that. Environmental factors make up sort of the milieu that you were referencing, right? The physical, social, and attitudinal environment. So here is I bet there's a pointer on here. Oh, so on the left, you can see this sort of plain Jane version. And on the right, you'll see there's this version that a group did to talk about spinal cord injury, just with a little more detail. And what you'll notice is that on the upper left side, where it says health condition and bodily function and structure, these are the ones that I would say the medical world, the medical institution tends to orient around. They're going to get in there and fix stuff, and they're going to treat stuff. They're very focused on the body bits and the diagnosis bits. The rest of it, I think, is really where the money's at for us as a community, because we actually can muck with that a little bit more. We have influence there. So as an example, if we think about environmental factors, to what you just had mentioned before, Jackie, I like your name. So if a person shows up, they live in a town and they don't believe in ramps, you would say this is a terrible town for a person who uses a wheelchair. But what if in this town, the environmental factor is a cultural milieu where there are always people standing in front of the library, and if someone comes up with a wheelchair, they just march up, they take up the chair, they walk them up the steps, and they leave them at the top of the steps, and they wait there for the person to finish. There's no barriers, there's no problem, because the environment has made this not a problem. And so is there a disability, actually? Is there even a problem because the person has complete access? If you always have this arrangement, this would seem like a strange town, but this would be one way where this environmental modification fixes everything for access and participation. It's addressing that lower right part of this model. So I just want you to look at the model and kind of in your head, see the arrows, see how they're multi-directional. There's personal factors. There's things like, what is your gender? What is your race? What is your socioeconomic status? Because if you're a poor minority with a disability, your life may look very different than if you're a wealthy white person with a disability, right? These are not standalone things. These arrows interact. And there's just realities about what the cultural milieu is and how people are welcome and participate in our community based on a number of factors, for which disability is one of those factors. So this came up too in our conversation. So this issue of disability versus normal. What is normal? I mean, I think we all kind of have a sense that there's, and really this is for us being in an academic center, we do know what normal is. We have standards of deviation and normal distributions and curves and statistics to know what normal is. So I think when we're talking about normal, it's an offensive word on a lot of levels, but from a practical perspective, there is a norm, and that exists for almost all things. But where the line of norm versus disability is an interesting question. So when we're assessing and describing disability, we really have to do it within the framework of what we're talking about and what our personal realm is. So I mentioned before, being short. So I'm short. I think, I'm for sure out of some reasonable norm. I know this because when I go shopping, there aren't clothes for me. So I must be out of a norm. But they have a department for me, a petite department. So I'm just one level out of a norm. So what about someone who's a little shorter than me? They may have to buy their clothes online or get them tailored. Is it a disability? I don't know. Maybe. Is it a disability to be really tall, though? Would we say the same thing about a really tall person? Is that the same? Or if I'm climbing up on the shelf at the market to reach the oatmeal because it's too high, I'm doing something pretty adaptive. Is it really a disability if I can just climb up or ask someone up, the aisle to grab it for me? So it's an interesting question where the line is that suddenly something about being not normal dips into the realm of disability. So in the medical community, again, we're talking about physical and health issues. In the school community, disability has to do with whether you have access to a free, appropriate public education. They don't actually care about the physical stuff. So you could have all kinds of physical disabilities by all accounts, and they say, oh, you don't have a disability by our definition because it's not interfering with your learning. So that's because it's a realm thing. It's a context. In that context, that isn't considered disability. In the general community, which is, I think, what we really are caring about here, it's really fluid, and it depends. And we have laws and rules around this about the tangibles, but I don't think it's a very clear thing where this line is. So I wanted to bring up the case of deafness. I think this is a really interesting example of where the lines are very fluid and variable depending on who you're talking about and what community you are talking from. So is there really a difference between deaf, capital D deaf, lowercase d deaf, hearing impaired, hearing loss, hard of hearing, deaf, mute, all of these terms? And the answer is yes. There's a huge difference. Some of these terms are offensive to some people. Some of these terms are offensive to everybody. Kind of depends who you ask. So the words have very different meaning, and they reflect cultural norms. So as an example, capital D deaf and lowercase d deaf. So one reflects a culture, capital D deaf, and the other, lowercase d deaf, it's describing an audiological condition of not hearing. So, I mean, I don't feel like this would be universally known. I feel like I know this because I know this. But, I mean, just as a question, how many people knew if they saw capital D deaf? Got a couple hands up. But, I mean, this isn't, I don't feel like Joe Public necessarily knows that this is like a huge issue and a big point for a lot of people, and that they may really step into it if they do it wrong. So it's really important that people speak really directly about this. Hearing loss is another example. So what if a person was born without any hearing? Why would we call that hearing loss? They didn't have it in the first place. So that's just the natural state in which they move through the world and do their everyday things. Is they've never had the hearing, they don't have it now. Hearing impaired, I would say this is generally what we use in medicine, right? We say this person is hearing impaired. Well, I use that at work, and it always gets me a little, because it kind of suggests that the person's broken by virtue of not hearing. So that's not necessarily a great community societal way to talk about it, and yet that's how an entire community medically talks about it. Deaf-mute refers to someone without hearing or reduced hearing who may not speak orally. So this is definitely, hopefully people don't say this very much, deaf-mute, deaf-dumb. I really hope people have moved past this. But it comes from the mute not speaking. But is the person really muted? Maybe they sign or use a picture communication system, or they have another gestural system that they use. To mute somebody is to eliminate somebody. So why, by virtue of having a hearing problem, would a person just be muted? That's a pretty substantial way to talk about somebody. You know, these words are powerful and have meaning. And hard of hearing may mean anywhere from mild to significant hearing loss. Like a really mild hearing loss, you would say, I'm hard of hearing. Well, where does this person fit? Do they fit in the deaf community? Are they deaf? Do they have a right to say I'm deaf? Where's the line there? So a lot of it has to do, again, with the frame. So let's take this example of deafness and talk about cochlear implants. These are really not easy decisions, cochlear implants, because they come in the context of that last slide. There's a whole cultural milieu around deciding whether to aid somebody or to do a cochlear implant. So why would we surgically implant something mechanical to make a person hear. Because we do these implants really early. In order for it to be a successful implant for congenital deafness, you're doing it like when a kid is 1. So that person's not deciding. This is being decided for them. So why would we do this majorly invasive procedure on somebody if it's not a problem? So who decides if it's a problem to be deaf? It's very complicated. What do we do if both parents are deaf and the child is born deaf and they're a part of a deaf culture? Does the health system press for them to get an implant? Who decides that kind of thing? What's okay there? And what if one or both of the parents are hearing and the child is born deaf? Now it's suddenly a very different decision because the cultural frame has changed. But it's still the same thing. It's a baby who was born deaf. But suddenly it's not such a clean picture of how we proceed. And what if the treatment protocol at the center, as it is in many and most, is if you get a cochlear implant, you don't sign with that child because they have to learn how to hear? Well, what's a family to do if both parents are deaf and that is the language of their household and that is the culture of their community, and you're shutting off this child from that community to make them an other from the existing community? So, I work with people in my clinical life who fit every one of these stories, and I don't have a right or wrong. I don't even have a judgment. It's not for me to judge. But these are the realities of how complex this is and how complicated it is how we see disability. If you view it as a problem, then you're fixing it. That's one mindset. If you see it as a natural variation of the human experience, maybe you think a cochlear implant is an aggressive assault on a person's body. It's very complicated and a hard decision for families and doctors to proceed in this context. So where's the baby's place if they get an implant? Are they deaf? Are they part of that community? What's their disability status at that point? How does the external world view them? So these are just examples, I think, of how complex this topic is. So what can we do to be sure we're inclusive? Being inclusive is the goal, and so there's a lot of natural psychosocial barriers to being inclusive. I added this point towards the tail end, and it feels a little controversial to me, but do we always have to be inclusive 100% of the time? I mean, so I'm not inclusive all the time with people who have or don't have disabilities. I don't want to be with people all the time. I want to be with just these people sometimes, or just these people. I don't need to be so inclusive of every single person all the time. So as we're talking about inclusion specifically to the topic of being inclusive of individuals with disabilities, what do we tell a kid at school who says, I'm being told I have to play with Susie, and Susie can't keep up with this game we're doing, and we really want to play this game today? Should we say to kids, you have to because we have to be inclusive? I don't have an answer to that. Do people have ideas about that? Yeah.
I think if you're not actively working to be inclusive all the time, then it's difficult to switch it on and off. So in a space where you need to be inclusive and you're not used to always being inclusive, you will be exclusive, which will be harmful to our most vulnerable individuals.
Yeah, so when you have to turn it on and off, if you aren't doing it all the time, you're turning it on and off, you're going to start to default to not. And then the people at most risk may be excluded.
It's interesting to be turned that we're talking about the deaf community. If I don't sign, I can't be part of that community. It is that community's responsibility to include me. And maybe there's like a need, if we're thinking about it from that perspective about who's included and who's not included. At least from my perspective, it's also what opportunities are you taking away from people who choose not to include, versus what opportunities are you creating for the people that are part of the network. I think that's sometimes a hard balance to have. I think to your point, like if you pick and choose, and you aren't turning off.
I saw some other hands, I feel like maybe. I wish, do we have a microphone? I didn't even think to, is there a spare? No. Maybe we can pass the microphone around for, can you repeat that? You know, a summation in the microphone, like a two-liner?
Yeah, so just to say, this is being live streamed, so if you prefer to not have your voice on the live stream for whatever reason, we can always repeat a question on your behalf.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So I was, this is something I'm concerned about within other communities that I'm part of, but it's a question of if you're being 100% inclusive all of the time. We just talked about the deaf community, and I would have a hard time participating in that community because I don't sign. So is it their responsibility to include me? On one hand, I think that could open up opportunities for me, but what does that take away from the community? But on the flip side, I don't think that excuses communities that I'm part of from excluding other people that we might be providing opportunities to. So it's, I think, sometimes a hard balance to have.
Some of it has to do with who is at the greatest risk of being marginalized by being excluded. It isn't necessarily equal. And
I just wanted to refer back to her.
Is that okay for you to be your voice on? Is that okay?
I was just saying that to refer to what you were saying in terms of the deaf community, I do think it's definitely a challenge. I know that as a deaf person. So I would just say, like, mainly, like, their culture is more so focused on sign language. And from my experience, if I don't sign to them, they view me as if I don't care enough about it. So it's like, oh, now I'm hearing. But if I sign, they're like, oh, you're deaf, you're part of our community. So it is hard. It depends on the person sometimes. So maybe that person grew up in a community with hearing people but had cochlear implants. Or if you grew up in a deaf community, maybe you went to a hearing school and had bad experiences. So it really varies based on that person and the situation. So I would say it doesn't hurt to keep trying. So don't get turned away, because I've had my fair experiences with that and I'm deaf. So it's totally fine. But I would just say, just keep trying. You never know how that person may feel. Everyone looks at things differently. So I would just say that.
no, if you see somebody who is struggling with something and it appears that it's related to a disability, I think there's like two strategies. There's either the like, I will assist you at all costs, and you can be like battling them off, and they're like, please don't help me. You're like, I will help you. Like that's one flavor. And the other flavor is, I'm not going to offer because I don't want them to think that I think that they absolutely need my help. Like, well, just ask. If they don't want your help, they'll say no, and if they want your help, they'll say, yeah, hey, thanks. I mean, this is just like being normal humans, and for whatever reason, it gets all weird if somebody has a disability. Like, suddenly the rules are off. It's like, no, it's like the same thing. Just, if you think you may need to help somebody, just ask, and they'll tell you. Could you pass the mic that way?
So this isn't really answering the question that you started with, but I was just sitting here thinking, is there some aspect of, it's not clear to me that every disability would have a community identity associated with it, and so we're talking about right now the deaf community, which has a community identity associated with it, and it seems like there's some aspect of this question we haven't quite touched on, which is, what does it mean to talk about what is or isn't a disability when there is an identification of a community group with that? Because I'm just thinking about my dad, who has a condition that the state might consider a disability. I don't think he does, and he doesn't see himself as part of a community of people who suffer from X condition. So I don't know. I think there's like some aspect of identification that is important to consider here.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And identification it's in itself very interesting, right? Because if you have a community that you can identify with, so I'm Jewish, and if someone says, well, what are you? One of the first things I say is, I'm Jewish. I'm a woman and I'm Jewish. Like lower on the list is like white and short. Like these are the two things that just I grab onto. But someone else looking at me may not identify those two things as being the most important to me. So similarly, if somebody has a disability, they may have an identifiable group to latch onto, but may have like zero affiliation or just a limited loose affiliation with that and have a much higher identification with some other attribute. So it's both an element that, oh, someone's having a bad day. It's both an element of complication from both angles. How people from outside, may try to relate to the individual, and how that individual may relate to other people, and what assumptions go in both directions. I think it's another layer. So, well, we kind of hit on my questions too. So, so what I wanted to talk about is there are some really clear risks of deliberate inclusion. And what I would argue is it's important that we have deliberate inclusion. I think for the point that you made before, that if we don't do it deliberately, it doesn't happen. We have to make a point. In historical issues of inclusion, there's just a natural period of transition where it doesn't feel natural. We're going to do this because this is the right thing to do, even though this isn't comfortable and normal and typical for what we're used to, but we're doing it, and then it becomes more and more natural and people don't think about it. But there's a really big window where we're just humans who get used to routine. So this doesn't, again, I want to avoid having people think about this from a malevolent sort of intent. People are just creatures of habit. So we get in the habits of thinking and behaving certain ways. So we have to be very deliberate and say, even though I'm having to actively think about this, I'm going to do this thing to be inclusive. It won't be natural for everybody, for every situation. But we run the risk of having problems with what's been, I just love this term, inspiration porn or disability porn. It's making people who have disabilities heroes and an inspiration. And I think the grossest, ickiest thing about it is it basically defines the person by their disability alone. It says this person, their disability is the sum total of their existence, right? And I would posit that most, if not all, people with disabilities get up in the morning, they're ticked that their alarm went off, they have to go do whatever they have to do, they go to the bathroom, may look different or the same as most people, but they're doing their business, they're getting fed, and they're going and doing their business. They're not sitting there and they open their eyes and say, I have insert condition X. Like, this is like probably not on their radar, okay? So I would say most of us have features and characteristics that it doesn't even occur to us until somebody treads on it, and then we notice it. But in the absence of that, it's like, who's even thinking about anything other than making sure they have lunch packed? So I love this image I found online. It says, never ignore somebody with a disability. You don't realize how much they can inspire you. And she is a woman in a wheelchair, inspirationally on the beach. And you're prompted to share it if you agree, forward to your friends so they too can be inspired by the impressive, brutal challenge of her being on a beach in the sun in a t-shirt, enjoying the sun. What exactly is inspirational about this? I'm unclear, because that looks like pretty good living to me, and I don't think she is doing anything other than existing. So it doesn't feel particularly inspired. And my guess is whoever the gal is in that picture up there, that if she knew that those words were going to be over her image and put on the internet for inspiration, that she would have made an ugly face or something annoying just to ruin the photo. I mean, this is really a huge crux of what the problem is right now, is these things fly around the internet. And, this notion that this gal is a hero, is doing something inspired, you know, it's important to remember that people with disabilities are jerks, they're obnoxious, they're lazy, they're wonderful, they're funny. They, you know, I have like that they're Netflix junkies and vegan, and like they're just people. So there's every flavor of people. They're not heroes or inspiring. And I'm sure plenty of people with disabilities do many inspiring things. I've seen them and met people, because people in general do inspiring things. But by virtue of just getting up in the morning should rarely be inspiring. Well, actually, that's not true. It is inspiring sometimes when we get up in the morning. But generally speaking, that should not inspire us that someone exists. So, you know, I'm going to show you a video that I found that it's pretty gross, actually. It's not good. And it was from USA Today. They had this Inspiration Nation story that they do their videos, and it's a promposal. And I do want to give the caveat that my reaction to this isn't that there's anything wrong with the people in this video. They seem like lovely people. I'm sure the kid is delightful, and there's no judgment against the people in this video. My judgment is going to be reserved for USA Today and what they did to show this video. So I want you to think as you're watching the video about these questions. One is, what's so special about this prom proposal? Kids have prom proposals all the time. Like, this is a thing now. So I don't remember them, but like, this is now a thing. What's special about this one? You know, why did it garner Inspiration Nation status? What is the language that the person in the video uses to describe the girl in the video? And what is the language that they use to describe the boy? So really listen to what they talk about each of them and how they describe them. And who is the target of the inspiration here? Because when there's an Inspiration Nation story, there's an identified target. Which of the characters in the story is the person who is the target of the inspiration? And why was this videotaped? Why is this a news story? And you know, who's the noble actor here? So I'm going to probably screw up this entire thing because I'm escaping out because I preloaded it. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, no, hold on. Somehow it got closed out. I'll open it again. It'll just take a second. Technology rules. Ooh, there it is. Ready? Be inspired.
He got the school to play her favorite song. He bought her flowers. Classmates held up signs of support. And Tiffany Gay said yes.
I have no idea. I have no idea if she would have said yes.
She come home yesterday and said, all the pretty girls in our school, and he asked me, Mama, me.
A day later, the prom couple got together for the first time since the big ask to talk about what happened and what's ahead.
You'll have your hair done, your nails done, your makeup, but I want a lot of pictures.
Louisa's parents and Tiffany's grandmother gushed with pride about how the middle linebacker on the football team followed his heart to his special day.
Most people are scared to talk to a kid with special needs, and he wasn't scared, you know. He just did it.
He made us really proud.
There aren't words.
My hat's off to him.
There aren't any words. He's a great kid.
Tiffany has a rare genetic disorder called Prader-Willi syndrome. She's extremely short. Her speech is limited. She's diabetic, and yet she has a chronic feeling of hunger that can turn into life-threatening obesity.
Huge heart. There's no difference between me and her. We're both human. We both have hearts.
This will be Tiffany's first date ever, but they've danced together before, back in the 7th grade, at a school party. He stepped up and asked. Ever since, Tiffany's had a crush on him, baking him cookies for every holiday, and twice when he had knee surgery.
Does Luis make you feel like a princess?
Yes.
Does he make you feel special?
Yes.
Does he make you feel loved?
So any comments at all about that video? What did the newscaster say about the girl? What did he focus on for her? Yeah, the focus was, yeah, it was a false narrative for one thing, right? Like she can't possibly, like it's an outrageous proposition that this girl would be asked to a dance. I mean, like it's insane that someone would ever dare think to ask this girl to a dance. Like that's the premise of the whole thing. And then listing off all of her physical disabilities. And then say again what you said. Yeah, very paternalistic, right? Yeah, like, you know, well, how do you feel? Do you feel loved? Do you feel special? Do you feel like a princess? Well, she was asked to prom. I mean, like, I don't know, sure, everybody likes to be asked to prom, but like, I mean, who asked that of a high school kid who was asked to prom? That's like this very paternalistic sort of, she's this perpetual child, right? She's just a perpetual child. This is such a grown-up special princess moment for her that a football player asked her to prom. It's a news story, right?
And the boy gets put up on a pedestal because he was the one that asked her, which is so ridiculous.
Yeah, the football player is the hero here. The noble, noble hero who bit the bullet and like, I mean, someone had to do it to ask this girl. And what was happening in the video, right? It was a setup. So everybody knew about it. Their cameras were ready, and he was being cheered on because he was doing this noble act, and the news was there, and it was on the video. So who are the grown-ups who told the news to be there? And the parents were so proud of him. He's such a good boy. You know, as if he had ran into traffic or something to, like, rescue a kitten or something. Like, it's sort of a bizarre thing. And this is what is on the news, being portrayed as something meant, it's right there, it's titled Inspiration Nation. It is an Inspiration Nation video. We're meant now to feel very inspired. And I'm sure this is like a great kid, and I'm sure she's lovely. Who knows? Maybe she's annoying and no one wants to take her to prom. I don't know. I'm sure she's delightful, right? You know, like these are all lovely people. But we don't know anything about them. The only thing that we know that is meant to inspire us is a guy asked a girl to prom. And because that's an outrageous proposition based on the litany of diagnoses and medical problems she has. I don't even know what she likes. It never came up. All that was relevant about her, the sum total of her existence, is she's got this disability. That's it. So I've been sucked into these videos before. We all have, and I'm like, I cry at the drop of a hat. I'm like crying. And what I'm asking you to do is make sure you've got your spidey sense on. Say, is this okay? Why am I feeling this way? What's happening for me right now? So I want to counter it with a different commercial. And I'm not going to show you the commercial because it's too long, but how many of you have seen this commercial? It's a gaming commercial. It's a Microsoft adaptive gaming device, and this was, I think, Super Bowl, yeah? Some sort of, yeah. Last year's Super Bowl, I think, or no, this year? This year. I'm losing time. So the video, the commercial is that a kid bolts out of a house and he's running through the town. He's like, it's going to happen, he's going to do it. And all the kids gather and they run back in the house. And the kid in the middle of the video is playing this video game using an adaptive gaming device, and he hits whatever level I'm sure they've been trying to hit to, and everybody gets up and dances, and it's awesome. And then they have the tagline, when everybody plays, we all win, right? So this is a really different kind of a situation because the gaming industry recognized that there was an access problem. And they didn't do this completely selflessly, right? They have a whole enterprise that they're not tapping for money. They have people who have disabilities who could use these devices and play the games that can't play the games now. This is a moneymaker, it's a cash cow. And people like when companies are inclusive, right? So I'm more likely now because I work in rehab, so I see this, I'm like, well, I'm gonna buy Microsoft products because they put something behind this. This isn't totally selfless, right? That's okay. You can be selfish and also inclusive. So it should not be a bad thing that people are doing that. Gaming is a community-based activity. How many people here game? I don't get it, but I don't get it, but my understanding is that like people go online and they've got headsets and they play with people in like Sweden or I don't know. So it's a community-based thing, right? So if you are by design a community-based activity that is excluding this huge faction of people, it's not a very good community, right? So if you can include people who have mobility issues or dexterity issues that make it challenging to use a traditional gaming devices by just making an adapted device, this is good. This is all a good thing. And the commercial shows a kid that was going to reach a previously unattainable level, and he reaches it. So the inspiration here has nothing to do with his disability. In fact, the commercial has nothing to do with his disability. It's not even a factor here. It's relevant to show it in so much it's a product designed for people who have disabilities, though anyone could use it, right? So, and we'll talk about that in a second about, just thinking about how something can be adaptive and anyone can use it. But he's a hero because he did something that all of those kids wanted to do, and he did it. So the focus of his heroism is on an achievement, not on his disability. And the people are clapping and cheering not because he has a disability and he did it. None of them did it. They're all excited because none of them did it. So that's why he's the hero. And that's what makes this commercial more of a win. And I'm sure there's people who've seen this commercial who are like, this is a terrible commercial, and there's things that I didn't even think of and I didn't see because in my frame I didn't catch it. But from my perspective, this is really a commercial that did it right because they focused on the right thing. And it is an inspiration porn. It has nothing to do with that. So I'm putting this up here just as a reminder for our next slides about this model of how we think about the interactions of our environment, health conditions, physical status, and our personal factors and participation. And then start asking the questions, well, given all of this, right, the complexity of the definition of disability, the complexity of the various social and contextual milieus, and just basic societal viewpoints in risk for inspiration porn. How do we start making sure that we are deliberately inclusive while avoiding that sort of icky approach and making sure we're being truly inclusive? So I would say that there's some low-hanging fruit. There's some easy ones that are simple and subtle. And I give you this example. So does anybody see anything here? Good, bad? What do you see?
If you were a wheelchair user, you would not be able to reach the elevator button.
Yes, if you're a wheelchair user, you cannot reach the button. That's my buddy Carrie that I work with, who took this picture at a hotel she was recently at. So she got this photo, and it's an easy fix, right? You just move it over, which she did. And the kicker is, every day it was moved back. So housekeeping moved it back where it was supposed to be. And they kept moving it out, and they never quite picked up. Somebody is moving this for a reason. So then the hotel I was at just this last week for a meeting was stacked up with like all kinds of stuff in front of it, and like no one could reach it. It was like people weren't thinking about the access issue. So there's a lot of basic universal designs that are attractive and simple and work for everybody. So like if you're building a house from scratch, why on earth wouldn't you make your house now with universal design? Like if I was to build a house, I would make everything 100% accessible for me, for anyone, because everybody is somebody who could have a disability even if they don't have one now. So I don't know what happens tomorrow. I don't know what my circumstance is. I don't know who I may have in my life, whose kids are going to come over to my house, what neighbor's going to need to come in from the cold. If I can make my house accessible out of the gate, then I just don't have to worry about it, right? So universal design, I think a lot of people think like, oh, you're going to redo your washroom, you should, do universal design, except, I don't want it to look like a hospital. None of these washrooms look like hospitals. I have to redo mine, and I'm looking at price. I can't afford this stuff, but it looks gorgeous. So, even if you look, the two middle images, those are grab bars. They look pretty slick, I think, but there's a lot of very nice ways that you can make a house or a space accessible. And I think, if you go into a building, one of the easiest places you'll see it is the washrooms and public spaces, where they have these gorgeous big stalls for people to use who need more space, and you have to go through some sort of like rat maze with like 40 hairpin turns to get to it. That's not universal design. That doesn't work. The rule is the stall has to be a certain way, and it's like somewhere along the line that people designing the space forgot you got to actually get to the stall. So what I want to do with our remaining time is I'd like us to break into groups, and you can self-select your groups. It's not however you feel is right. There's going to be two things. One is you're going to find a card on your table. And the card has a sticker on it that says, I commit to increase inclusion of individuals with disabilities by. So it can be anything. So my huge pet peeve, and some of you have heard me say this before, is I am just fit to be tied about where the card readers are at one of the supermarkets in town. And I harass endlessly the managers and management of the grocery store to move the card readers lower so people can use a self-checkout. They haven't done it, and I get responses that are insufficient. So I'm like a dog with a bone. I just keep going back and like annoying them, and eventually they're going to get tired of it. So that's my thing. It's little. Like, I'm just going to make sure that I keep harassing the people at supermarket X to move the card readers. That's what I would write on my card. And there's going to be things, your thing may be even like, I'm going to look around my space more deliberately. That's fine, but pick something. What are you going to do to be deliberately inclusive and make sure that you're making your community deliberately inclusive? I want you to write it on the card and put it in the envelope and write your address on there. And just leave it here. And I'll mail it out to you in a month. And the reason I want to wait is I want you to really have a reminder in a month, because as we've talked about, this stuff slips, man. It slips off. I always make mental pledges to be really mindful to do certain things, and then it falls off. So have it as like a reminder of like, hey, yeah, did I do that? How well did I do with that? And when you get it, if you've done it and you're doing the thing you said, write something below it and make it your next step. And just be deliberate during this period of transition we find ourselves in, where things aren't inclusive, but they can be, and we can get there if we continue to be very deliberate. So that's one thing, is I ask you to, before you leave, just write something on that card, address it, an envelope, seal it, it's not my business, and I will mail it out to you. So that's one thing. The other thing we're going to do is break into groups. And I have two vignettes, and I have copies on your table too, if you don't want to sit and look up. These are two vignettes of situations that can come up, and I'm going to read them just in case there's people who have trouble with seeing these. The first one is, there's two, and they're both numbered 1, but ignore that. One is Karen and Bill married a year ago and just moved. They're eager to start a new family. They know it's important for Karen to establish in their new town with an obstetrician, gynecologist, so that they don't waste any time having their first baby. She's put in an exam room by the nurse and asked to put on a gown and sit on the exam table to wait for the doctor, and suddenly realizes she can't reach the exam table from her wheelchair to have the exam she needs. So that's one example. So, for this one, I want you to think, well, what happened here? What's something that could be done that's an easy fix? If I saw this happen, what would I do? If I noticed this when I was at the doctor, what could I say? How could I handle it? And how could I make a difference in this space? So the other one is Aziz has a small window from his job for lunch due to an important deadline with a client. He has low vision and hearing loss and short stature related to a congenital genetic condition. He's able to readily ambulate without a cane, so it's not obvious. So this, again, this is that invisible disability. It's not obvious he has any sensory challenges. He walks into a noisy build-your-own-burrito joint, and upon reaching the counter, he is too short to see over, and with his limited vision and the lunch crowd noise, it's a challenge to order. And there's a line building up behind him. So this is something that could happen every day for any of us. You see something at the counter, you notice something. What could you do? What's a way, when you walk into a restaurant and you look around and you order, do you stop and look? Like, what would it be like if a person came in here in a wheelchair, or who was blind, or had hearing problems, or autism? What would that look like? How would the ordering look like? So I want you to break into groups and take about 5-10 minutes and talk about one of these or both of them, and then we'll kind of reconvene together for our last 5 minutes and talk through what you came to. And I'll kind of circulate and turn my mic off so it's not creepy. And if you're remote listening to this, I'm going to keep these up on the screen, and you can talk in your own groups and process together as you're talking. Well, if I can get everybody to kind of circle back around again and wrap up their conversations. Thank you. So there were a lot of really nice things, interesting ideas I heard when I was walking around. I wonder if people would be willing and interested to share some of the things that their group came up with, and we'll pass a mic around for that. Did anybody do the group in the back did the restaurant option? Yeah, so could you guys share something from your solutions and observations?
So what I was saying is that it goes upon the customer service aspect. I'm dining, so it's teaching your staff to be accommodating to somebody that doesn't necessarily have the ability to reach a counter or get through the line quick enough, and recognize it and be available.
Yeah, so I mean, it's basic customer service, right? And good for everybody, a good general rule. I don't think any of the other groups did the restaurant option, did they? Did you? Okay. I was going to say, I feel like when I was at your table, you were talking. So did you have any other things that you wanted to add about the restaurant option?
So my colleague was talking about a restaurant that was in a town where she used to live, where everyone just filled out their order on a slip of paper, which is interesting because I had a similar experience when I was traveling in a country. I didn't speak the language very well, and one of my favorite restaurants that we went to twice for this very reason is you could order on a slip. So you didn't have to have the feeling of like, I have no idea how to order in another language. You just filled it out. So there's maybe different methods of making yourself understood that they could explore.
Yeah, I like that. So, creating alternative menus, order slips, multiple mechanisms for accessing the line and the food. That's perfect. Anybody have any comments about the OB-GYN appointment option? So to make sure that you're communicating directly about the needs you have associated with your personal circumstance to ensure that your needs are accommodated. And I really liked the idea you just had of, there are exam tables that go up and down that can be lowered, making sure that your provider has that, and that if they don't have what you need in order to get the best care for you, that place should be providing you with referrals to places that can. So maybe if we work in a place where maybe we're in a rural environment or a place where there's lower income and less capacity to service all of the people we'd like to service, it then becomes our obligation as providers or as community members who have certain goods or services to generate a list of accessible resources instead of just saying we can't help you, but to say we can help you, however, we have this. Right, so expecting people who do not share your specific accessibility needs is a risky proposition because they may not even recognize it's it's just this little thing. It's you could do this, you could handle this, and not really having the space to make that judgment on your behalf. So these were really terrific, thoughts about these, and I think that the takeaway I hope that you have from this, this workshop, from the conversations you just had, in general, is to remember that disability really means different things to different people. The definition's going to vary. It's not going to be this sort of universally decided thing. We do have this ICF model, and it's very handy for thinking about points of impact and points of increasing access. And I think this deliberate inclusion is really important. It's important societally for us to do it, but we've got to be really attentive to the pitfalls, mindful, keeping our spidey senses up about slipping into inspiration porn or making assumptions about people's abilities. But we want to be deliberate without objectifying, and deliberate in our inclusion. And just remember that in your advocacy, little itty-bitty things really make a big difference, because it's those little things that are the everyday things. You don't have to do something dramatic. Most of the annoyances when people don't have access are over little stupid things. So if you see something in your community, say something and do something, and it will actually make a really big difference. So I want to wrap up with a quote from Stella Young, who is this outstanding, hilarious Australian comedian. There's a Scott Hamilton quote that says, "The only disability in life is a bad attitude," and it's plastered all over inspiration porn pictures. But she says, that quote, "The only disability in life is a bad attitude. The reason that's bullshit is no amount of smiling at a flight of stairs has ever made it turn into a ramp, and no amount of standing in the middle of a bookshelf and radiating a positive attitude is going to turn all those books into Braille." So I love that. She's great. You should see her TED Talk. She's hilarious. So I want to thank you, and again, thank CEW+ for the wonderful programming that they have. And don't forget to leave your envelopes. And thank you for your attention.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you so much, Dr. Kaufman. That was a really a wonderful presentation. I hope that you can stay to join us to continue the conversation and to talk more directly with Jackie or Dr. Kaufman if you have further questions. I can't make that.
Jack, it's all the same. It doesn't matter.
And then a couple of things I just wanted to let you know about too is CW. We just completed a renovation of our space, and we're having an open house tomorrow from 1:30 to 3:30, and we invite you all to come join us for that. The building is accessible. There's an elevator that's in the corner of our building that if you get on it, and then you'll have to buzz the second floor CW, then we will open up the elevator. Just for security reasons, it's not open up, but we hear the buzz. We know that someone's on the elevator who needs to get in. The other thing is that we also have 2 more programs in this CEW+Inspire series. One will be in March, and the other one will be in June. I want to get the title right for the one in March, which will be actually at the Hatcher Graduate Library, and it will be by a U of M business faculty. And the title of that one is "You Can Shake the World: My Ongoing Journey as a Developmental Economist, if I can speak that." And then the other thing is that, as always, we invite you to our new space, whether you can come tomorrow or not. It is really in nice shape, to a study space, really a home away from home when you're on campus, to make you comfortable. We do have a coffee machine, so you can come in and make hot coffee or tea at any time. So anyone is welcome to join us there. And again, thank you so much, Dr. Kaufman. We appreciate it. Yeah, thank you.